All right. Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour show. I am very excited to have with me a dear friend of mine, Kirstin Carey, who is a returning guest, and very excited to announce that she and her husband, Anthony DeNobly, just launched their new book, Transformational Healing, which is a Amazon bestseller, #1 bestseller. So we are going to dive in today into her book to find out what it's all about. Kirstin and Anthony have done amazing things with people, helping them heal, especially from autoimmune and endocrine issues. So we are going to pick her brain. And thank you so much for joining us today, Kirstin.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited about this book. Yay!
and I know why you're excited, because it is a long process to put together a book and to launch it. And she and her husband, they created it. It takes time to put it into publication. There's a lot of learning that goes through that. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing us this great masterpiece.
Yippee! Yay, ma'am. I don't know if it's quite the masterpiece, but for me, it's the masterpiece.
It is. I've read it. It's a ton of great information. So we want to dive into it. But before we go into that, we do have new listeners, and that's people who probably haven't heard about you before and don't know your background. So why don't you share with us a little bit about you?
Oh, sure. So Anthony DeNobly and I, he's my partner in crime in all things. He and I created this company because essentially I had autoimmune diseases, celiac and Hashimoto's diagnosed, and rheumatoid arthritis was sneaking in on the sidelines. And I went through traditional medicine. I did all the testing, all of the things I was supposed to do, the medications, the probing, the prodding, all of the fun stuff, and still wasn't getting answers and was getting worse. The symptoms, I mean, we don't even have the time for the amount of symptoms, but I mean, it was things like digestive issues, skin issues, migraines that would bring me to my knees. I always had a problem with my cycle from literally the first day I got it. There was always some mess going on with that. Docs put me on all sorts of hormones and, the birth control and all the stuff. And, it was just normal, right? And then it just kept getting worse. And then finally, when I hit like real adulthood, like got into my, mid 20s, 30s, I started weight problems. I mean, it just kept going.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally went more natural medicine, but, was $800 of supplements a month. And I was all the testing and all the things. And I still didn't feel like I was really getting anywhere. But I did finally get the diagnosis for celiac. And I was so excited because I thought, well, yay, now I can fix it, right? Yeah. But, they're like, just take out gluten and call it a day. And it still wasn't getting better. Then I started realizing all the symptoms were kind of connected. So I ended up going back to school for nutrition. My husband ended up leaving his job and going back to school for nutrition. And then we also have additional certifications. And I have a lot in the trauma therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, more of the emotional subconscious connection to healing approach. My husband has more of the sciencey stuff, which is more of the lab interpretation, deeper into the nutrition component. So we're a great complement to each other, but we put together a full program to help people get all of the pieces they need to heal from. Autoimmune is kind of our bread and butter, but we get a lot of chronic issues. I mean, there's only really 20 autoimmune conditions you can truly test for. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's just kind of putting together symptoms and calling it something. But there's over 200 known autoimmune conditions. So there's a lot of clients that don't have the diagnosis, but they've got a lot of the issues. They've been going on typically 10 or 20 years, where they're looking for an answer. And, traditional medicine gives you a name and then they kind of just call it a day. So we've come around to really say, well, how do we help people with especially thyroid, but all the autoimmune issues, because it's all stemming from the same thing. Yeah. So that's where I end up. That's how we ended up doing what I do. I mean, I didn't dress up as a nutritionist as a kid for Halloween. Like, that wasn't the goal. But apparently the universe had a whole different idea in mind for me. So
isn't that funny, like how that works? Because I remember hating health in school. Oh, yeah. And now look at it.
Health we learned in school. I mean,
yeah, true. Good point.
We could pull that apart all day, but
good point. Yeah. So, okay. So you developed this business, company Nourish 123, and you have a very successful program. I know some of your clients that are going through it and have seen the results. So why a book? Why create a book?
Yeah, great question. Because for years I was like, oh, we don't need to go that direction. Because my company prior to this, I had books out, I had other things that we had sold and products like that. But the reason we finally got to this point, because I know the labor intensive nature of putting out something like this, um, I just didn't want to go through it. But I was like, there's more people who need this information. And some people aren't ready to get into a program like ours because ours is very comprehensive. I mean, it's an all in kind of approach. So we really looked at it and said, okay, let's put something out there that would help more people get more information that they really need without having to jump into a full on program. And then give them understandings of, even if they don't work with us, if they're working with another practitioner, like what they really need to know going into that story. And if it's not the right practitioner, why? And so it gives them much more information on all of the pieces that I think are necessary for you to really come to true healing, like long term, not just this 8-week program and you're going to detox and you're going to feel better. It's an actual long term approach to, we're not just feeling better for today, we're actually setting the stage for us to feel better long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And a book is a great way to introduce people to all the concepts, and we'll go into it, but it's a great way for people to take it piece by piece, absorb what you're saying. And you even give a ton of suggestions. I love your chapter takeaways. So people can read through the material, then say, okay, here's kind of what I need to know.
Right.
And they can get started on some of this stuff before they even join your program. But obviously the program is going to be a lot more comprehensive. But
Yeah, I mean, the piece you do, I mean, obviously with any book, you're not getting the practitioner themselves to help guide you through the process. But
yeah,
what I try to do is take the knowledge that I have, which is, I have to say, pretty extensive, on how people think, learn, feel, understand, and how they undo or break generational trauma, how they break trauma they don't even realize was trauma, and how people actually truly absorb information. And we broke the book out that way. So it's broken down into sections, it's broken down into pieces, it's broken down into pull-out quotes, it's broken down into the chapter endings. So it's one of those things that if somebody's I just have 30 seconds that I want to flip through quickly, they can get a concept right away. People who have the time to sit down, they can keep reading if they want. But all of even the chapters, we purposely kept tight and shorter so that people could sit down and read a chapter and then take that concept and kind of let it sit. Because some of the stuff we get into, and I went back and forth on some of the pieces that we have in here, we wanted to break it down into digestible pieces so that people really understood the concepts and then could actually do something with them in their actual everyday life.
yeah. And it's great because even you have it separated by chapters, but also by parts. And the three of the main parts are your three pillars kind of for health that you have, and we can go into that. But you also have like a beginning before that, trying to get clarity, and then the plan after. So what's nice is you're helping people foresee the future through goals and what they need to know, but you're also saying, okay, we're not going to leave you hanging. Let's look at a plan.
Yeah, because I hate that when I'm reading stuff. I'm like, okay, great. Now I'm all wound up over how like this is a terrible thing or whatever I'm reading. I'm like, okay, now what? And they kind of just go, now you're done. Like, I'm like, but what do you do about it? Like, I'm a very concrete bullet point it for me kind of girl. So I like to do that too for people and say, if you got nothing, get these three things.
Yeah.
But we also tell stories and thread them through because that's actually how most people learn, is actually through the stories. So we have stories thread throughout, and we're not just giving like, yay, the miracle story. Like, we're giving actual legit, this is what it looks like for real stories. And we even tell the stories about the people who got to a point where they weren't going to get where they were going and why they got stopped. So people can really kind of see themselves through those stories as well and get the information they were looking for, and not just say, oh, well, this isn't for me. It's like, well, why didn't what I do to this point work? What about that didn't serve me? Or what about that failed me? Not I failed. There's some piece that was missing for my particular needs in my healing trajectory.
Yeah. And that's hard sometimes to figure out what exactly our own needs are, and which is why we have someone that kind of can be from the outside to guide us on that and help us see, hey, we're missing this part. But you need someone who's comprehensive in being able to identify that too.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
mean, we set up our own defense mechanisms, right? For us not
Mm.
to be able to see certain things because it kept us safer. Well, when you set up your own defense mechanism, you throw away the key because you're trying to not see that thing. It's a lot easier for people
Yeah.
like us who are, well, trained in this too, but
Yeah.
we see this every day and we're not emotionally attached to their needs and their outcomes the way they are. So we can see
Mhm.
stuff very
Yeah.
easily a lot of the times. My entire team is brilliant. And
Mhm.
actually, interesting, my entire team have been clients, like they're past
Mm.
clients,
That's neat.
except for, so Anthony's the only non-past client on the team. And we have a lot of practitioners, or they become practitioners somewhere else as well.
Mhm.
So there's a higher level of knowledge, I think,
Yeah.
running through our team.
Yeah. Yeah. And when someone has experienced it, they know, like you said, the ins and outs, and they know the tendencies of us to block things or to
Yes.
shift or all of those things that we as humans, we are just wonderful human beings. We try to get out of things or we try to avoid things. We're
Yeah,
just
we get in
living.
our own
Yeah.
way. And,
Yeah.
most of our clients are A-type personalities. They're women who get stuff done. They're women who take it all on. They're the woman you want to go to get something done. That's
Yeah.
typically most of our clients. They tend to be, they're all women, lots of moms, lots of people between the ages of 35 and 55 are our
Mm.
main clients, but we have clients outside of that.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who get stuff done and then they don't read their own body language or really understand the communication their body's been giving them because
Yeah.
they're getting everything else done for everyone else. So even just breaking that cycle is part of the process and learning how they can put themselves first and not feel guilty about it, not feel bad about it, not get all that resentment coming through for a lot of the things that they've chosen in the past. That's a big part for a lot of our clients because
Yeah.
anxiety is huge for a lot of our clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I kind of want to touch on a little bit too is when we think about getting clarity. So, part one of your book is getting clarity. And you mentioned about goals and setting goals. When you are growing up and you're in school and you're setting goals for life, health is usually not part of goal
No.
setting. You think about, okay, money, finances, career, maybe a house, but you don't think of, okay, my goal for my health is to meet all these markers or whatever. So that's something that will probably come across as a little bit different for people reading your book because it's like, oh, why don't we do that? So do you want to talk a little bit about the process of gaining clarity?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, actually, even just the word goals freaks people
Yeah.
out sometimes. Like
Oh,
they get
yeah.
upset over the word goals because then they're like, well, I've tried that goal setting thing before and I failed, so I don't want to do that. But they've usually done it in a way that was harmful to their success.
Mhm.
So a lot of people, so the closest thing most people get to setting goals for health is usually how many calories am I eating? How much do I weigh? Or how many days am I in the gym?
Yeah.
None of that measures health at
Yeah.
all. And it doesn't help them understand what is truly helping their body get to what the body sees as safety and health and happiness, joy.
Yeah.
So that's where I think a lot of people also just steer clear because how many people do you have like, oh, well, as long as I have my health, I'm good. But that is never defined, right? As long as
Mm-mm.
I have my health, I'm like, well, are
Yep.
you working on that? Is that a thing? That's
Yeah.
not the calorie counting or the measuring of
Yeah.
the weight. So we really want our clients to start setting clarity around what
Mhm.
is it that they truly want in what period of time. So like,
Mhm.
what do you want in 12 weeks? What were you looking for in about a year? What were you expecting to see in about 3 years? What's the life vision?
Mhm.
And then kind of backing through and say, okay, can we do this in this amount of time? And being clear, like if you've been suffering for 25 years and you expect everything to be over by tomorrow, we kind of have to reset some of the expectations.
Yeah.
But most people that we've met are usually very reasonable what they're looking for because they've been under this cloud for quite a while. So they're like, I want to be able to wake up in the morning and not have my body dictate what happens for me that day. But I
Mhm.
just don't know what to do, so I'm not in this space all day long.
Yeah.
So it's really understanding, but what's the vision? And a lot of our clients get paralyzed right around the question of where do you want to go at the year? Like, I mean, like mentally paralyzed.
Yeah.
Where do you, at
Yeah.
the year? Oh my
Yeah.
God, that didn't sound great. At the year mark, where do you want to be? And some of them
Mhm.
start to falter a little, like, oh, I don't know. And they give them some answers. I'm like, okay, 3 years. And they're like, I can't even see 3 years out.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's been so long I've been dealing with this, I don't even know, or I'm afraid to say what it is I want because the fear of not being able to get it, because I feel like I've been trying and white knuckling it around the processes I've done before. So the
Mhm.
idea of I might fail. So even around the
Mhm.
clarity, we talk a lot about what does a goal really look like? Why does it look this way? What do we mean by what are you looking for? What would you like
Yeah.
to see? So that helps a lot of people kind of break it down a little bit better so that they're attainable. And then once you start to attain, the subconscious goes, oh, we can do the next one, we can do the next one, and it can start hitting that, like what we call up leveling.
Well, and the other thing too, and this, I wonder if this is a factor, is sometimes when it comes to health, people are not sure what can be attained in a certain amount of time.
Oh yeah.
They know, okay, they can starve themselves and lose 20 pounds in a month or two by starving themselves. But when it comes to other things that are so subtle, and there's so many subtleties in terms of, okay, if I eat this, it affects this and this blood level of this marker. And so that I can imagine comes into play too when you're
Oh,
doing goal setting. So having someone, especially like you and Anthony, who are doing this all day long, and you know how fast or how long it takes to have an adjustment in a certain aspect of health, I can imagine that's really helpful for your clients.
Oh, it's incredibly helpful because now they understand like what's reasonable. Because some of them will say, well,
Yeah.
I'd like to see this, but I don't know if it's possible.
Exactly.
And the I don't know it's possible a lot of times comes out of, well, traditional medicine, functional medicine, even natural medicine. A lot of them don't know either because they haven't had clients who have been able to reverse symptoms the way that we see it. So traditional medicine is more, let's name it, let's prescribe for it, and let's maintain the health. Let's maintain where you are. Where more of the way we approach it is more, well, let's understand why you're where you are. Let's now go after what started those root issues, and let's start undoing what is causing that problem so you can not just maintain where you are, reverse the issues you're dealing with, and actually truly get into a healing space. Most people are in what we consider crisis mode, which means that the body is spending most of its energy, if not all of its energy, just trying to stay out of the crisis they're in. So stay out of the pain that they're in, the migraines, the digestive issues, the thyroid disorder.
Yeah.
And they think, oh, well, by taking this medication or eating this special food or doing this special diet, I'm going to go into healing. And I'm like, well, not necessarily, because if most of your energy is still maintaining the crisis, because you're not stopping what got you there in the first place, you don't have the energy to do the healing part.
Right.
So we're really trying to educate people to get out of crisis so they can take that energy that they have, that they were managing the crisis, and get into an actual true healing space and have their cells replicate in a way that are managing, or not managing, but they're actually healing.
Yeah. And the word reversed, especially when you use that in a condition or disease, that's usually something people are not familiar with hearing, because they don't understand. At one point, they didn't have that condition and they existed. So something changed in all the inputs they're putting into their body to lead to where they are now. So why can't you reverse it? So, and you've been showing it and proving it, that the word can be associated with disease and conditions.
All day
you
long.
can reverse stuff.
Yeah, all day long. And that's where I get frustrated for people. I was frustrated for myself for years going through this, because the doctors were kind of like, well, you've got X now, so now you're just kind of on that pathway. And I'm like, but why? And it was never like, the answer was just because, like, well, that's, you have it. So, well, your mother had it, and I'm like, but why doesn't my sister have it then? Like, why doesn't everyone have it? Like, so Anthony and I spent a lot of time with our clients around the concept of epigenetics. And that's my favorite chapter. Actually, I found out later it was Anthony's favorite chapter, chapter 20, I think it is in the book. But we talk a lot about epigenetics, which is a newer science, which they really haven't been talking about publicly for only about 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
But I know you and I have had all sorts of conversations around this, so we love it.
Yes.
But if you look at studies and the work by Dr. Bruce Lipton, he's a biologist. He was one of the very first team of people to replicate cells. So they were literally able to take cells and clone them. So if the cells, which are the DNA of the body, the cells, if they are cloned, they should act exactly the same way. Well, he put them in different environments and found that they behaved differently, and they produced different proteins, and they acted differently. So he kept going back and being like, well, wait a minute, if these are the same DNA, they should act exactly the same way, because the DNA is supposed to be the thing. So he even went back to his team and said, something's not right here. We've been teaching people DNA is the whole thing, and this is proving that that's wrong. So he ended up leaving the whole thing, because they kept saying, well, you must be messing something up. and started doing real research on his own on really understanding what does this really mean. And what he found is that the environment in which he was putting these cells was really the influence over how the cells changed and behaved. So epigenetics, the term genetics, obviously we know what genetics is, it's DNA. Epi means above. So above means what's influencing those genes. So Anthony and I spend a lot of time with our clients talking to them about emotional, mental, physical, spiritual influences over your genes. So you can be predispositioned to have something. If your mother has Hashimoto's, you may have a predisposition for Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition that attacks the thyroid. But that doesn't mean you get Hashimoto's. So the question is, well, why does some of us get it and some of us don't? It's what's influencing the genes to either express as Hashimoto's or be silent. So Anthony spent a lot of time around what's the external environment. So what viruses are in your area going on, like what toxins are in the foods, what toxins are in the air and the water supply, what other issues are going on outside of you. And then internally, what are you thinking, feeling? Do you feel connected to a spirit or a bigger picture? Like, what's your purpose? And when people realize that, that gives them empowerment to realize that they have influence over which of their genes are expressing and which goes silent. So if one is now expressing, you can influence it to go silent, which means you can start reversing the position that you're in or how your genes are expressing or how the cells are acting. So for me, celiac disease and Hashimoto's, I was diagnosed with both of them. Neither of them comes up on labs now that a doctor who didn't know that ahead of time would diagnose me with anything. But the doctors who do know say, well, you can't get rid of it. You can only put it in remission. And I'm like, well, now we're splitting hairs, right? Because if you didn't know this, you wouldn't give me the diagnosis. And if no one ever caught it and it reversed out by itself, nobody would have ever said it. So it starts to get really interesting to me, like how we look at the body. And if we only look at the body as once you have it, oh, well, you're screwed, then yeah, you are. But if you are working with a practitioner who doesn't believe or has ever seen anybody reverse out of anything and they have no concept of healing, you need to find somebody else.
Seriously. Yeah. Well, because if you keep doing the same things that they're going to tell you to do and you stay in that situation, like your body's never going to learn how to heal itself.
Right. Because you don't even have someone, the expert you're working with doesn't even believe it's possible. Therefore, they're never going to recommend anything that would get you there. They can't, they don't even, it's not even in their purview. And they're actually, they're in, I forget which chapter we talked about this. We have it's study after study after study showing that if the practitioner doesn't believe it, your chances of healing actually drop dramatically. And then on top of it, if you don't believe, your chances of healing drop dramatically. So at least find a practitioner who believes in healing. And then you find a practitioner who knows it's possible because they've seen it happen with the people they've worked with. So, I mean, again, it doesn't have to be us. I'm just telling you, if your practitioner is saying you can never get better, there's more to the story.
And I know that's part of your soul section part, which is dear to your heart because that's kind of the area you specialize in. Well, and you've had a transformation of yourself and you saw the health related changes to it. And a lot of people don't realize your soul, your purpose, your identity, all of those impact and influence your health dramatically. So why don't you touch on to that a little bit more? Because people don't realize how closely linked they are.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they're not just linked. I mean, it's so, you can take the nutrition and you can take the science and you can take the soul aspects. You can never do just one of them. They're always linked together. The soul, the mental version of who we are, the emotional version, the spiritual version, the physical version. You can't separate those things. Healthcare as a whole kind of separates them. Like, here's the mental health people. Let's separate that out completely from the physical health people. Let's separate that out from our spiritual health or our soul health. And you can't divide those out. We're a whole being that includes all those things. So even if you have a physical symptom, there is still some emotional component to it. There is still some mental or spiritual component to it. So when we start to see ourselves as just these bits and pieces that are not tied together, we're not just parts of a car. So, but we treat ourselves that way, right? Like, take this piece out, put this piece in, and it doesn't affect anything else. And that's just silly. I mean, that to me is just it's ridiculous because you are affecting all parts parts of you beyond just the physical as well. So if you grew up in a challenging childhood, which is many people, and you had parents who weren't necessarily equipped to be as supportive as they needed to be for you, you do grow up in a different way, thinking how you can support yourself and how that supports your health. So we go through a lot of examples. I have my own examples personally. Like, there's a lot of things people don't see as trauma that are actually traumatic to the system. So like when I was a kid, my dad, boys were better in his family, and it was better to be a boy, and you had to be strong. And so my dad, kind of believing in this as well, he wanted my sister and me to be strong females. So he would teach us sports right from the beginning and taught us not to cry and not to have emotion and just suck it up and walk it off. And he's thinking he's helping us, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds good on the surface, but there was a moment I was 4. I was outside with my dad. He wanted to teach me how to start playing ball. He has his adult glove on my tiny little hand, and he throws the softball to me. The thing hits the glove, hits me in the face, splits my lip open, and he grabs me, and I'm bleeding from the face. And he takes me into the kitchen, and my mom's making dinner. And she looks up, and I'm bleeding, and she's like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And my dad is beaming from ear to ear. He's so happy, so proud. My mother's like, "What's wrong with you?" And he says, "Look at her, she's not crying." And now in his mind, he's super proud. Look at me, I'm like, I'm probably just still shocked from being smacked in the face with the ball. But I got the message, and we get these messages really early on, that daddy's proud of me. I'm not crying. That is going to keep me safe, because if your caregivers are proud of you, excited for you, noticing you, you're more likely to stay safe. So we start hardwired into us looking for messages from especially our prime caregivers. What's going to keep me safe in this tribe? Because if I'm protected by the tribe, I'm less likely to die. I mean, that's just all hardwiring. So as I continued to get older, I kept looking for messages to support this idea that emotions were bad. Daddy will be proud if you can suck it up and walk it off. And my sister got the same message too. So the two of us were very proud of our strong ability to compartmentalize emotions and pieces like that. But it actually started to hurt me over time, because you can't squash an emotion and just call it a day. It goes somewhere. And if you don't learn how to process an emotion, and that doesn't mean you have to cry. And a lot of people, I don't think, get that either. Just because you're crying doesn't mean you're processing. But I had to learn how to accept and understand and learn how an emotion was dissolved through the system or processed through the system. So no doubt I ended up with celiac disease, because a lot of your emotional processing actually goes through the gut. So you're digesting your emotional response. And I ended up with celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease condition from the gut. And then thyroid disorder, not shocking. Most women, especially, but men too. We're not communicating who we really are. We're not being authentic. And the thyroid sits right here. So you see a lot of that where we're suppressing our conversation with self, with the universe, with the people around us. So the emotional piece is affecting the mental piece, is affecting the physical piece. So a physical symptom just doesn't mean something's wrong with you physically. It means that your body's communicating with you through a physical mean. It doesn't mean the root is actually a physical issue.
Right. And if you think about it, anytime someone's in pain, there is always an emotion component to it. There is no way you can't. You're thinking, oh my gosh, I have pain. Why did it happen? How long is it going to last? Is it going to affect my next trip or my next activity? Is it going to affect my ability to do X, Y, and Z the rest of the day? Like, there is no way to separate it out. Period.
No, what did I do wrong? Why is this happening to me? All of the things. And there's emotions stored in those cells and tissues. And I know, I mean, I even worked with you as a client. You were my practitioner. And there was so much around trauma for me as a former gymnast, a former athlete, which was still lodged in some of the cells and tissues of my body. And you worked with me to let go of. In fact, I literally just a second ago released something in my hip that I was like, oh, and now it's ingrained in me to release that. But there was a safety element that I learned right away as a gymnast. You hold your body a certain way. And as you taught me over time, that's not necessarily putting your body in the best place because you're in fight or flight. So even with stuff like that, there was an emotional component to a lot of the pain that I was feeling in one of my hips and
Yeah.
my shoulder, which are not there anymore either.
Yeah, which is nice. Very
It is
nice. I'm glad.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on a little bit. This will be a little bit shocking to a lot of people because it's not normally talked about, but you have it in the science part, this chart about drug-induced nutrient depletion. And I think that is huge because many of the medications that you have listed there, they are not telling us about what nutrients are getting depleted about our body, and they're very common ones that people take.
Yeah.
It's kind of an important topic, and I just want you to touch on that a little bit. We don't have to go through specific ones, but what's going on when we take medications?
Yeah, it's page 103 for those of you who have the book. 103 and 104.
Yeah.
I mean, when you've got nutrient depletions, you start ending up in a whole other space. And what's really interesting is if you are emotionally stressed, physically stressed, or mentally stressed, the body doesn't care. It still sees it as stress. So it's putting you in this fight or flight. When you're in fight or flight, your body doesn't absorb nutrients the same way it does when it's in a calm, safe space. So as you start looking through, and we've got, blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. I mean, Anthony really laid this out. He started pulling it apart, like which of the nutrients were depleted, but then there's medications that then cause that to go further. So if you look at what causes the body to do what it does naturally, you want to work with the body, not against the body. So when you take a medication, and again, there is a place for medication. So I am not saying everyone stop taking their medications. That is not this conversation. There's a point where they are very necessary. But when you're on something for the rest of your life, or that's the intention, there's something that now the body says, well, wait a minute, you're trying to circumvent how I naturally work. So it starts to push the body or force the body to do something that there was a reason it wasn't doing it naturally. So the better question isn't, do I take something to fix this? The question is, why am I doing this? Or why is my body doing this in the first place? So as you start to go through all of the pieces that are listed here, like Pepcid or Zantac, anybody who's taking anything for like heartburn, it suppresses the immune system. So when you sit there and you look at a side effect for a medication, it suppresses the immune system. So look at all the viruses that have been out there. Obviously, there's lots out there that we're talking about these days. You're looking at other issues, cancers, things like that. When you suppress the immune system, you're suppressing your body's ability to protect and help you heal, which is the other part people don't understand. So if you're taking an immunosuppressant, it's not allowing your body to actually heal. So now you can't get into the healing space. But it's one of the most common prescribed things, and people are often taking them over the counter.
Yeah.
And you're only supposed to, it says right on the box, don't take for more than 2 weeks. There's a reason for that.
It does say that.
People are on it for weeks and weeks and months and years at a time. So one, it suppresses the immune system. Two, it also does the opposite of what the body's actually needing. Most of the time, when the body has heartburn, it's not because you have too much acid. Believe it or not, it's because you're not producing enough stomach acid, which actually puts the body into a space where it's not digesting the food fast enough. The food starts to ferment, then it starts building up and pushing back up into the esophagus, causing what seems like an excess of acid, but it's not. So then they say, well, I have heartburn. Oh, it must be too much acid. It's because you don't have enough to break the food down fast enough. So over time, you're now getting less acid because you have an acid reduction medication, causing more problems over time. So over time, you're now bloated, belly's getting larger, your body's in more panic, and you're suppressing the immune system.
Wow. And then you have to keep taking it.
More acid.
Jeez. And then you keep taking the medication because you feel like you keep having to take it, and you get into this chronic cycle over and over again.
Yep. And what's really frustrating is that most doctors don't even test for the stomach acid, or even just say, hey, let's see if we can do a digestive enzyme or some betaine to help with the acid issue. What we have found is a very interesting component is a lot of our A blood type clients typically already start with less acid in their stomach. They don't produce as much, just as a general rule. That's not everybody, but we found that across the board, we're like, it's an A every time. We're like, there you go. So they're already struggling with low stomach acid. As we get older, we produce less and less. So the older you get, and if you're an A especially, you're going to struggle even more with this. But taking the acid suppressant or taking the Pepsid or any of those medications, is going to make everything worse over time. And then it's going to double up as you get older because you're producing less as it is. Yeah.
Wow.
So this is like a tiny little thing that then spirals out into a whole other problem. And then you end up with people with a whole bunch of other digestive issues related to that.
Which is like mind blowing. And at the same time, when we think about, okay, that's one condition where we can look and say, do we really need this medication?
Right.
Especially for a long-term effect, what can we do to change our nutrition? And at times, do supplements come into that as well?
They can. So in that case, there might be a digestive enzyme that needs to be kicked in for a short period of time. There may be a digestive enzyme only when maybe you're eating something that's a heavier meal like meat. A lot of times it's harder for the body to digest. So we're like, if there's a meat related issues, then you want to take it. But then you can take some betaine or some things that help to produce more of the acid. Or you can just look at your diet and say, okay, what in here is causing my body not to be able to break the food down? Or am I eating the food in a specific order, which I don't like to get this specific, but like if you're drinking a juice and then trying to eat food behind it, fermentation often happens because the juice, you eat the food and then the juice behind it. Fermentation happens a lot of times with the juice because it's now sitting on the heavier meal. I'd rather see people eat like fruit or juices first, let the body sit for a couple of minutes, and then put a meal behind it if they choose to do that.
Got it.
But
that's fascinating.
That way. Yeah. So again, the way the stomach acid works, the way the body digests, you don't want things to ferment sitting on top of a heavier meal.
And so just in general, then, do you recommend people drink fluids before a meal, let the fluids just kind of sit just in it as a general sense? And
I prefer, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, and then eat afterwards, or how do you?
I'd rather people give themselves at least 30 minutes before they've had something to drink before they eat something, because it kind of washes through some of the stomach acid and some of the other production that's going on there. So I don't love it when people like drinking a bunch of water and eating and then drinking a bunch of water. And some people say, well, I have to drink water when I'm eating because, it washes the food down. Then I start saying, well, let's look at the food you're eating. Is it so dry and so processed that there's not enough liquid in it and there's not enough moisture in the food that you're getting all caught up trying to swallow?
Yeah.
So that becomes a whole nother thing. Are we eating a ton of processed food? Because if you're eating food that just you're pulling off of a tree or out of the ground or shooting with an arrow or, pulling out of the lake, typically there's enough fluid in there, enough liquid, enough moisture that you don't need to add to your food. Okay. I still am a big fan of people drinking lots of water throughout the day. Yeah. But right before you eat and right after you eat tends to cause more bloating or challenges because it's either washing away stomach acid or it's trying to pile water on top of something as it's trying to digest.
Okay, and then I have two questions related to that then. So then how long after you eat a meal should you wait? Like a half hour before you start drinking?
At least a half hour. Because most people, if their stomach is working the way it's supposed to, if their digestive system is actually doing its job, you've got a good hour and a half, 2 hours as your body is processing all that and moving it through. Okay. So transit time from the time you eat something to the time it leaves your body should be about 18 to 24 hours. If it's more than that, then certain toxins are reabsorbing back into the colon and back into the digestive system. If it's too quick, you're not having the food in the system long enough that you can actually absorb the nutrients. But as far as like when you sit and eat, if you're still like feeling like you're digesting an hour and a half later, whatever you ate was either too much or there's not enough stomach acid or production in the digestive tract for you to move that food through. So I'm not a huge fan of drinking too much within at least a half hour after you eat, but an hour or so, because it's it'll sit on top. And I know some people are like, okay, some things are making sense now. Because if you ever eaten a really big meal and then you drink a bunch of liquid, you're like, oh,
you feel worse,
right on the top. That's not the feeling that you want. So either you're not drinking enough liquid throughout the day as it is, that you feel the need to toss it behind, or whatever you ate was just too dry and either processed, or you need to start kind of evaluating some of the food you're eating.
Yeah. Now, this isn't an issue for me because I don't like alcohol, but people sometimes like to have wine with their meals, and those who are connoisseurs pair wine with certain foods. I can imagine that's kind of like it's going to butt heads with that a little bit,
Yeah,
huh?
ideally, it's not the best to be
Yeah,
sipping and eating and sipping. I mean, if you're just sipping here and there and you're eating, but you're chugging, that's, I
yeah,
mean, wine
okay,
shouldn't be chugged anyway. So
right,
but
right.
you're still actually better off taking in liquid on the stomach.
Mm,
Now we're getting into alcohol. So if you're taking in an alcohol on an empty stomach, it's going right in.
yeah,
So, the effects are going to go faster. So
yeah.
alcohol, just it's, in moderation or not at all is really your best option.
Which the whole thing about alcohol, that's becoming a little bit more popular to go alcohol free. It's becoming a little bit of a fad, so that's a good fad.
Yes, I would appreciate. I mean, people are like, well, when can I get my alcohol back or something? Like, well, you can. We're not telling you can't have it.
Yeah,
I'm just telling you, ideally, if you're
yeah,
inflamed
yeah,
and you'd like the fastest, easiest shot of healing quicker, putting an inflammatory thing into your system is not the greatest choice.
yeah,
So anything that causes an inflammatory response, and alcohol is inflammatory, whether it's healthier red wine or not, it's still inflammatory.
yeah,
So
yeah,
when we look at alcohol, people are like, well, but I only have a little bit. I only have one a day. I'm like,
yeah,
if you're inflamed, your body is begging you to stop that.
yeah,
Or if a client comes in and they're like, oh, well, I still smoke. And I'm like, again, I'm not going to tell you not to do anything. I'm going to tell you what's ideal. And if you keep choosing that, then choose it. But just know it's an inflammatory food
yeah,
choice.
yeah.
The only thing Anthony and I are very, very clear with our clients on is that
Mhm,
gluten and dairy are no one's friend.
yeah,
And we are very black and white about that. Like, if you continue to keep these things in your system, you can't truly get into a full healing space because the body will be in an inflammatory response. Not just some of the people, literally, and we have them in the book, we have the studies that show that
mhm,
literally every single time anyone eats gluten, there's an inflammatory response in the system. Some are more than
yeah,
others, but there is an inflammatory
yeah.
response.
And
So
those antibodies last a while too.
yep, for gluten, they can last up to 6 months.
Long time.
I know, I know. So whether you have a gluten intolerance, whether you have an allergy to it, whether you have
Mhm,
autoimmune, your body doesn't respond well. And it's not the same thing that they talk about in the Bible. When they talk about the wheat from the Bible, totally different thing.
mhm.
Ancient wheat, 8 chromosomes. The wheat that we have now, 32. Like, to me, it's not even the same species. Like, it's not
Yeah,
the same
yeah,
anything.
yeah,
And they've
yeah,
added more gluten over time. So it's a whole litany of stuff. Why could my
yeah,
grandparents do it? And they also
yeah,
made their own stuff. So if you want
yeah.
to go, get to the wheat shaft in the field and do it yourself and grind it and all the things, go have at it. But we don't do that. So,
Not many.
no.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is great. So, okay, we've kind of touched a little bit on nutrition, a little bit of science and soul. Is there anything that you wanted to cover on those three topics? Because those are the main parts of your books that when you're looking at health to improve healing, what you want to touch on. So is there anything that you wanted to mention that just really stuck out on you that we didn't cover?
Um, well, one is that there's no one diet that fits all. It's
Yeah,
really
that's a
important for
good
people to
point.
recognize. So if
Yeah,
you are looking at a program that said there's one way to eat and there's only one way to
yeah.
eat, that's the only way to eat, I question that. Some people do really well in plant-based, some people do really well eating animal proteins. We found, at least in the crisis mode with most autoimmune conditions, at least some level of autoimmune, maybe a little bit of fish. But most don't do well on the plant-based from the beginning. But over time, they can absolutely move into that. But if
Mhm.
somebody's plant-based and they're like all in on the plant-based, we absolutely can work with that.
Yeah.
But the idea is we have to find what's right for you in the trajectory you're on
Mhm.
in this healing space. So it's going to shift on you over time too. So the idea is there's no one diet that fits all always. So that piece. The labs, I really want people to start looking at the labs
Yeah.
that they're being asked to be done. If your practitioner is trying to find a unicorn by throwing $10,000 of labs at you,
Mhm.
we typically say, hey, take a step back from that approach
Yeah.
because it's not the unicorn diagnosis or the unicorn find that really helps people get better. It's really the understanding of how to interpret the basic labs to understand how the overall physiology is working in the system. So it's more the brown horse that we typically look for rather than this
Mhm.
magic unicorn of answers that's going to give
Yeah.
you some special thing that you were, the 0.5% that the people found. So
Yeah.
it's more of that understanding. So they're the things we see the most. Or if you've got a supplement approach that is like $500 or $800 of supplements a month, something's still not right there either, because you can't, as Anthony likes to say, you can't supplement your way to health. They're supposed to supplement you. They're not supposed to do the business, as he says.
Yeah.
Do the business.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the things that we see a lot of from people. And then also just kind of that search for the diagnosis. Just because you have a name for something doesn't mean it gets any easier.
Mhm.
And a diagnosis is just a name for a collection of symptoms. That's it.
Yeah.
So, you know, people sometimes get on this path, and I know I was on it for years, of at least tell me what this is, and then I can fix it. And if you don't even understand what the core underlying issues are, the name doesn't make a difference.
Right.
So they're kind of like the bullet point pieces we really want people to understand as you're going through this process. And then the other thing is that you're not broken. Please, people listening to this, you are not broken. You are not beyond repair. You just haven't found the way the pieces fit together for your unique puzzle.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the big ones, I think.
Those are good topics. Yes. And I'm glad you brought up the labs too, because that is a big deal. People go down that rabbit hole of lab after lab after lab. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and just helping people realize you are just where you are right now because of things that have happened in the past, but that doesn't mean you have to stay that way. And when you're in a chronic situation, it's hard to believe something else.
I know.
So it's like you have to get around people who have led others through the path of healing. You just have to.
And actually get around others who are in the path of healing. Like, I mean, interestingly, we started out as just one-on-one kind of approach, but over time, our clients, at the time we had, I owned restaurants, and then we had the wellness center attached to the restaurants. And a lot of times clients would come in when another client was there, or they had their appointments, and they'd come in to get food with their families, and they all started getting to know each other. And then there became this other healing component that I hadn't realized was so critical. So when we went online with our program and started taking clients outside of the immediate area, even actually now outside of the country, what ended up happening is they wanted to know each other, because we would do retreats and then they would get to know each other. So we started doing more group related kind of things where they can get on group calls together. And we still do some one-on-one as well. But what started happening is that the trajectory for all of them started getting better faster, because they started seeing the possibility in the storylines of other people. So they were there also rooting them on. So then they would start to learn their process or learn their storyline, and then they would get excited for them at the next meeting when they would see things shift. And they were also there as a better support system for them when things weren't going all the direction they wanted it to go. But they knew how to support because they understood at a soul level. You know, your spouse wants to help, or your kids want to help, or your friends want to be there for you, but they don't get it the same way as people who are going through a similar process. And not everybody has the exact same things, but the energy is very similar. So they start getting together on these calls. They start seeing somebody else get their coaching that day, or they get to see the storyline, and they get to participate at whatever level they want to. And then they get better faster. So the community aspect of what we've created here, I think, is very different than anything that I had seen when I was trying to find my answers. So that alone starts to set what we do apart in a way where you show up, you feel like you belong, you don't feel crazy anymore, you don't feel like people don't get you, you don't feel alone in the process. And you also get to heal, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you hear someone else ask a question about something you didn't even think to ask about. And then you're like, oh my God, that just mirrored something for me, or opened up a whole door for me I didn't even realize I needed. So I think that's also why we get the results with clients the way we do, because they're there also in a healing capacity with everybody else in a bigger scale.
Yeah. And it's great because they can feed off of each other, like you said, and it's another source to help you on your journey. It just is.
And it's not a commiserating thing. Like, that was very important for us, that it wasn't going to be one of those Facebook groups where everybody gets in there and they commiserate about how they feel about what's going on, and nobody's really there for the healing piece. They're there more to kind of whine and complain to each other, and they all feel like they belong. And I get the need for that piece. But we were very clear that we're not here to commiserate. Please show up in whatever you're showing up in. Like, if it's a bad day, let's talk about that. If it's a great day, let's talk about that. But we're not here to commiserate, to just kind of keep the vibration here and everyone's sick. We're looking to up level and raise the vibration exponentially.
Yeah.
So that was that's an important piece for us, which is why we meet with clients before we decide, is this a good fit? Because we want to make sure it does fit for the larger picture as well as for the individual as well.
Absolutely. Oh, this is great. So I appreciate all of your time, and I don't want to take up all of it because I know you have to jump as well. So first, how can people find the book?
Great question. So you can go
Yeah.
to nourish123.com/th
Yeah.
for transformational healing.
Mhm.
It'll take you right to Amazon, so you can get it right there. You can get the ebook, you can get the print book. And then once you get the book, there's all sorts of fun things in here. We have a QR code. We have other links. I was looking for the QR code and I can't find it now. It's right here. Oh, here it is.
Towards the
The
front.
QR code and
Yeah.
all sorts of things, because we put together an entire resources page that you'll have access to once you buy the book. And it'll give you some of the exercises that we do. There's an entire guidebook to take you through the exercises within the book to make it easier for you and break them down even better. I even recorded one of the exercises so people can listen and go through the exercise with us. And we have other resources there too. Because honestly, if people never talk to us and never get to work with us and they just do the stuff we have in here, they're going to see a shift in their healing. And that's so important to me, because I was lost on answers for so many years. And there was a lot of tears, and a lot of despair, and a lot of frustration and all that, because I knew there had to be something easier than what I was going through. There had to be. So I had to create the process to do that. But it's here. It's here.
Yes. And now you glow, you shine, your vibration's high, your energy's high. Like, you can see the difference. Not that I knew you when you were very sickly, but you can just tell right now how exuberant you are about life.
Well, it's so exciting when you have clients come in and you know where they were when they started, and you have all the notes from that. And then at the end of the program, we sit back and we go through the notes and we go through the stuff and their goals, and they've not only hit them, they've surpassed them. And it's like, and then they're going, I can't believe this is me. And oh my God, I'm thankful every day I get to do this, every day. There are moments I'm like, oh, this is hard, but I'm so grateful for our clients and the ability to be able to process and help people process this information.
That's great. Well, we thank you for your time. One more time, the website.
Nourish123.com/th for transformational healing. And or you can just go to Amazon and search it for yourself, but it takes you right there. So
okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy woman, so thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you all for joining us today. We will be back again next week. Please go check out Kirstin and Anthony's website, nourish123.com. Put that /th to get to the book. Go check it out. It's a great book. I bought it. I've flipped through it many times. Go through it. There's chapter takeaways. It's very easy to read. It's understandable. You don't have to have a science or medical background to read it. So go check it out. And thank you all. And we'll see you again next week. Bye now.